The cabin went quiet when the oxygen masks dropped without warning. Not the gentle, practiced fall from a safety video, but a violent snap, plastic slapping foreheads, cords whipping like startled snakes. A man shouted, a woman prayed. Somewhere up front, metal screamed as if the plane itself had inhaled too sharply and regretted it. Seat 22 Delta. That was where Evelyn Carter sat, hands folded, eyes steady, breath measured. She did not reach for the mask right away. She watched the ripple of panic move through the aisle like wind across tall grass. Watched the flight attendant freeze, mouth open, knuckles white around the service cart. Watched a boy across the row clutch his grandmother's arm as if she were an anchor. The smell of hot plastic and recycled air pressed in. The plane leveled. The masks swayed, obedient now. "Please secure your masks," the captain said, voice calm, almost bored, as if calm were a muscle he'd trained for decades. "This is a precaution." Precaution. Evelyn's lips tightened. She lifted the mask, fitted with practiced care, then looked past it, down the narrow tube of the aisle, to where the curtain trembled between cabins. She had learned long ago that words like precaution and routine were often used when someone was trying to buy time. The flight was bound from Phoenix to Chicago, a late afternoon crossing, sun low and harsh through the windows. Most of the passengers were older, snowbirds returning north, retired couples with matching windbreakers, quiet men reading paperbacks with cracked spines. Evelyn looked like she belonged among them. Early 60s, sensible shoes, grey cardigan folded over her lap, a leather tote scuffed at the corners. Nothing about her asked for attention. The service cart finally rolled again. The young attendant, name tag reading Jason, forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. His hands shook as he handed out water. "We'll be landing shortly," he said to no one in particular. "Everything is under control." "Is it?" asked a woman with silver curls and a voice sharpened by years of being ignored. Because it didn't sound under control. Jason glanced toward the front. "Ma'am, please." Evelyn watched the exchange without intervening. She took her water, felt the condensation bead against her fingers. Cold grounded her. She counted breaths, in and out. The plane dipped again, gentler this time. Somewhere behind her, a man began to cough, deep and wet. The sound crawled up her spine. She had boarded this flight with a plan that did not include oxygen masks. Plans changed. People revealed themselves under pressure. That was the point of watching closely. When the seatbelt sign chimed, a collective exhale followed. The captain spoke again, announcing an unscheduled stop in St. Louis due to a mechanical indication. Mechanical indication. Another phrase. Another veil. Jason reached Evelyn's row again. "Ma'am, we'll need you to remain seated after landing," he said quietly, eyes flicking to the aisle. "There may be some paperwork." "For me?" she asked, voice soft. "For everyone in this section," he said, then corrected himself too quickly. "For some." She nodded. "Of course." Across the aisle, a man in a pressed blazer leaned forward. His watch caught the light, expensive, deliberate. "What does that mean?" he demanded. "I have a connection." Jason swallowed. "Sir, we're doing our best." The plane touched down with a jolt that rattled teeth. Applause broke out, thin and nervous. As they taxied, the curtain ahead opened and closed, as if people were passing secrets through it. Evelyn noticed two men she hadn't seen board. Dark suits, shoes too polished for travel. They spoke to the purser, a woman with a rigid smile and eyes that kept darting toward the cockpit. The seatbelt sign stayed on. After they parked, the doors did not open. Minutes stretched. Heat rose. The coughing man slumped forward. His wife pressed the call button, then pressed it again. No one came. Evelyn stood. "Mom," Jason said instantly, appearing as if summoned by her movement. "Please remain seated." She looked at him, not unkindly, directly. "There's a man who needs water," she said, "and air." Jason hesitated. His gaze flicked to the purser, who shook her head almost imperceptibly. Procedure. Chain of command. Fear dressed as professionalism. "I'll take responsibility," Evelyn said. It was not a threat. It was a statement. She stepped into the aisle. The plane felt narrower standing. Sounds sharpened. The cough behind her grew ragged. She reached the galley, filled a cup, crouched by the man, placed the water in his shaking hands. His wife mouthed, "Thank you," eyes wet. When Evelyn turned back, the purser was blocking the aisle. "Mom, you cannot leave your seat," she said, voice clipped. "This is a safety issue." "So is dehydration," Evelyn replied. The purser flushed. "You're interfering with crew operations. I'm assisting a human being." Behind them, one of the men in suits cleared his throat. "Let her pass," he said quietly. The purser stiffened. "This is not your decision." The man met her gaze. He did not raise his voice. "It is now." Evelyn returned to her seat. The cabin buzzed with whispers. The coughing eased. Somewhere a baby laughed, the sound bright and wrong in the tense air. When the doors finally opened, paramedics boarded first, then airport security, then, at last, passengers. The man in the blazer brushed past Evelyn without apology. The silver-haired woman squeezed her hand. "Thank you," she said, "for not pretending." In the jet bridge, the air was cool and smelled of oil and coffee. She held his gaze a moment, then looked away. They led her to a quiet room with beige walls and a humming vent. A recorder sat on the table. The supervisor introduced himself, voice rehearsed. Another man entered, older, with a scar along his jaw and eyes that weighed things. "We had an indication in the flight management system," he said. "We followed protocol." "I don't doubt it," Evelyn said. "I doubt the culture that made a young man afraid to bring water to a coughing passenger." The older man's mouth tightened. "You don't know our culture." Evelyn leaned back. The chair creaked. She folded her hands again. "I know what happens when people hide behind words," she said. "I know what it costs." The door opened once more. The man in the dark suit stepped in, closed it behind him. He placed a phone on the table, screen down. "We're ready," he said to Evelyn. The supervisor frowned. "Ready for what?" Evelyn met his eyes. For the first time, something cold and precise surfaced there, like steel drawn from water. "For the part where the truth stops waiting," she said. Outside, the plane sat quiet at the gate, a long silver body resting after a scare. Inside the room, the air seemed to thin again, not from altitude, but from the weight of what was about to be said. The supervisor cleared his throat and slid the recorder closer, pressing the red button with a practiced finger. The soft click sounded louder than it should have. Names, times, and locations began to spill into the room. A ritual meant to establish control, to frame what had happened as an incident rather than a pattern. Evelyn answered politely, economically, her voice steady, her gaze unfixed, drifting instead to the vent above where warm air whispered through cheap metal slats. Outside the room, the terminal moved on. Shoes scuffed, wheels rattled, announcements echoed with false cheer. Inside, time thickened. The older man with the scar leaned back, arms crossed, watching her as if she were a puzzle missing its edges. He asked about her seat number, her reason for standing, whether she understood federal aviation regulations. The words were familiar, heavy with implied consequence. "I understand them very well," Evelyn said. "I also understand discretion." The man's eyebrow twitched. Discretion works both ways. Yes, she replied. It does. The door opened again. Jason stood there, pale, his uniform rumpled, eyes darting between faces. You ask for me? He said, voice barely above a breath. The supervisor nodded. Sit. Jason remained standing. His hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles shone. He did not look at Evelyn. He stared at the floor, at a dark scuff mark shaped vaguely like a shoe heel. The supervisor asked him to recount the events. Jason spoke haltingly at first, then faster, words tumbling as if he were afraid they might be taken back if he paused. The masks, the indication, the instruction to keep passengers seated, the cough, the call button unanswered because the purser had told him to wait. Always wait. Who told you to wait? The older man asked. Jason hesitated. The silence stretched. Evelyn could hear her own breathing again, slow and even. She watched Jason's throat work as he swallowed. The purser, he said finally. And before that it was just understood. Understood how? The supervisor pressed. That we don't make decisions, Jason said. His voice cracked on the last word. That we don't escalate unless told. That we don't improvise. The older man sighed. This isn't about feelings. It never is, Evelyn said quietly. The supervisor shot her a warning look. Nam, please. Evelyn inclined her head, conceding the floor. Jason shifted his weight. I wanted to help, he said. I really did. But there are write-ups. There are notes in your file that follow you. I've seen it happen. The older man's jaw tightened. You're excused, he said abruptly. Jason looked at Evelyn then, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. There was apology there, and something else. Relief, maybe, or fear that he had said too much. He left without another word. The supervisor stopped the recorder. This will be reviewed, he said. We'll follow procedure. Evelyn stood. The chair legs scraped softly against the tile. Procedure without conscience becomes habit, she said. And habit becomes culture. The older man stood as well. He was taller than her, broader, used to looming. He did not loom now. Who are you? He asked, not unkindly, but with an edge of irritation. You speak like someone who expects to be listened to. Evelyn considered him for a long moment. She reached into her tote and withdrew a slim folder, worn at the edges. She placed it on the table and slid it forward. Inside were copies, not originals, documents with seals, signatures, dates that stretched back decades. The supervisor frowned as he flipped through the pages. Color drained from his face in stages, as if his body were processing the information in waves. The older man leaned over his shoulder, eyes narrowing, then widening. He straightened slowly, as if careful movement might undo what he had just seen. No, he said. That's not possible. It is, Evelyn replied. And it has been for a long time. The room felt suddenly smaller. The hum of the vent grew louder. The supervisor's voice came out hoarse. You're telling us that you are... I'm telling you, Evelyn said, that the policies you enforce, the culture you protect, the fear you normalize, all report back to a board that answers to me. The older man ran a hand over his scar, a nervous habit betraying him. Why didn't anyone know your face? Evelyn smiled then, faintly. Because faces invite assumptions. Paper invites accountability. The supervisor sank back into his chair. This changes things. It clarifies them, she corrected. There was a knock. Another man entered, younger, eyes sharp, carrying a tablet. He glanced at Evelyn, then at the folder, then at the supervisor. Operations is on the line, he said. They've pulled preliminary data from the flight systems. Already? The supervisor asked. They flagged the unscheduled descent, the man replied, and the cabin response time. Evelyn felt something shift behind her ribs. Not satisfaction. Recognition. The machine had noticed itself. Put them on speaker, the older man said. The voice that filled the room belonged to someone who had learned to sound calm under scrutiny. Numbers followed, timelines, delays measured in seconds that felt longer when someone was gasping for breath. The older man closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, looking at Evelyn with something like respect and something like dread. We'll need to suspend the crew pending investigation, the supervisor said cautiously. With pay. Yes, Evelyn said. You will. And the purser? Evelyn's gaze hardened. You will look at patterns, not personalities. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Outside, a plane roared past the windows, climbing, free. They escorted Evelyn back through the terminal. People glanced at her, then away, seeing only another older woman with sensible shoes and a scuffed bag. That anonymity wrapped around her like a coat she could take off, or leave on, depending on the weather. At the gate, Jason stood with his jacket over his arm, waiting. He looked up as she approached. I'm sorry, he said. The words tumbled out, earnest and raw. I should have acted sooner. Evelyn placed a hand on his sleeve, light but steady. You acted when it mattered, she said. Now remember how that felt. He nodded, blinking hard. As she walked away, her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from a number she knew by heart. The board had convened an emergency call. Legal was looped in. So was compliance. The machinery was turning, slow but inexorable. Evelyn stepped into the evening air. The sky over St. Louis was bruised purple and gold, the sun slipping behind low clouds. She paused, drawing a breath that tasted of rain and jet fuel. This had never been about a flight. It was about what people did when they believed no one important was watching. Somewhere behind her, inside the quiet room with the humming vent, decisions were being made that would ripple outward, touching lives far from this gate, far from this city. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her tote and walked on, her pace unhurried, the weight of truth steady in her hands. The call began without ceremony. No greetings, no small talk, just a low chime, then voices sliding into place like pieces of a machine that had been waiting to move. Evelyn sat alone in a quiet corner of the terminal, phone pressed to her ear, eyes on the wide glass wall where aircraft tails cut slow arcs against the darkening sky. Around her, people hurried, unaware that decisions forming in invisible rooms would soon alter the texture of their everyday travel. The first voice belonged to Martin Hale, chairman of the board. Older than Evelyn by a decade. Careful, conservative. We've reviewed the preliminary brief, he said. Operations confirms an anomaly. Legal is concerned about exposure. Exposure. Another careful word. Exposure is what happens when rot meets light, Evelyn said. Her voice was even. No heat. Heat was wasted energy. A pause followed. She could picture them. Men and women seated around polished wood, jackets folded, glasses of water untouched. Screens glowing with charts and timelines. None of them had been on that plane. None of them had heard the cough tear through the cabin. We're talking about a domestic route, Martin continued. Limited press interest. We can manage this quietly. Evelyn closed her eyes. For a moment, she saw Jason's hands shaking. The purser's averted gaze. The way authority had pressed down, invisible and absolute. Quietly is how this happened, she said. I didn't call you to manage noise. I called you to address cause. Another voice cut in. Linda Reyes from Legal. Sharp, precise. We need to be careful about precedent. Suspending an entire crew sets expectations. So does tolerating fear, Evelyn replied. The line went silent again. Then a new voice, unfamiliar, younger. This is compliance, he said. We've pulled records from the last 18 months. There are patterns. Evelyn opened her eyes. The sky outside had deepened to blue-black. A baggage cart trundled past, beeping. Tell me, she said. Delayed responses, elevated complaint language around tone and dismissiveness. Most of it dismissed as subjective. Because it was inconvenient, Evelyn said. Yes, the man admitted. Because it was inconvenient. Martin exhaled audibly. What are you proposing? Evelyn straightened. The chair creaked softly. Immediate suspension with pay for the purser and captain, pending a full review. Mandatory reporting interviews for every crew member, and an external audit of cabin culture. That will leak, Linda said. Good, Evelyn replied. Sunlight. The call fractured into overlapping objections, concerns about stock price, labor relations, reputation. Evelyn listened without interrupting. She had learned long ago that letting people exhaust their fear made room for clarity. When the voices fell quiet, she spoke. You hired me years ago to stabilize a failing company, she said. I did that. But stability without integrity is just decay with better branding. I will not preside over a system that teaches young people to wait while someone struggles to breathe. Martin cleared his throat. You're asking us to choose between disruption and denial. I'm asking you to choose between leadership and liability, Evelyn said. The vote was not unanimous. It never was. But it passed. She ended the call and sat still, phone cooling in her hand. The terminal lights flickered as night settled in. Somewhere, a janitor whistled softly, the tune familiar and out of place. At the hotel, Evelyn stood under the shower longer than necessary, letting hot water pound her shoulders, rinse the recycled air from her skin. She dressed slowly, choosing comfort over appearance. Tomorrow would bring faces, explanations, resistance. Sleep came late and shallow. She dreamed of alarms that never stopped ringing. Morning arrived grey and wet. Rain streaked the windows as a car took her to a low office building near the airport. No logo outside. Inside, a conference room filled with people who looked like they belonged in rooms like this. The captain sat rigid, hands folded. The purser stared at the table. Jason sat at the far end, shoulders tight, jaw set. Evelyn entered without announcement. Conversations died mid-sentence. She took the seat at the head of the table, set her tote beside her chair, and looked at them one by one. She did not raise her voice. This is not a trial, she said. It is a reckoning. The captain bristled. With respect, ma'am, we followed procedure. Yes, Evelyn said. That's the problem. The purser finally looked up. Her eyes were rimmed red. I was maintaining order, she said. You can't have passengers making decisions. No, Evelyn replied. But you can have humans responding to other humans. Jason shifted. He spoke before he could stop himself. I asked if I could help, he said. I was told to wait. The purser turned toward him, shock and something like betrayal flashing across her face. You're making this worse. I'm telling the truth, Jason said, voice shaking but steadying. I was scared. Silence pressed in. The captain's jaw worked. Fear doesn't belong in the cockpit or the cabin, he said. And yet it was everywhere, Evelyn said. That is not the failure of one person. It is the failure of a system. She slid a stack of printed reports across the table. Complaint excerpts, timestamps, patterns highlighted in quiet yellow. No names yet, just behaviors. The captain scanned the pages, his posture sagging inch by inch. We didn't see it, he said finally. You didn't look, Evelyn replied. Looking is uncomfortable. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows. Inside, the room felt stripped bare. No one spoke for a long moment. Evelyn stood. "This will not end with discipline alone," she said. "There will be training, oversight, and accountability that does not disappear when the headlines do." The purser's shoulders slumped. "What happens now?" "Now," Evelyn said, "you sit with what happened, and you decide who you are when no one is watching." She gathered her tote and walked out, leaving them with the sound of rain and their own breathing. In the hallway, Jason followed her. "Thank you," he said quietly. She stopped, looked at him. "Don't thank me," she said. "Remember this feeling, then pass it on." He nodded, eyes bright. Evelyn stepped back into the rain. The air was cold and clean. Somewhere, far above, a plane cut through the clouds, unseen but steady. The work ahead was heavy, necessary. She pulled her coat tighter and walked forward, already feeling the ground shift beneath the industry she intended to change. The news broke quietly at first, the way uncomfortable truths often do. A short internal memo, a carefully worded notice to regulators. No names released, no dramatic language. Just a confirmation that an internal review was underway, following an unscheduled landing and a cabin incident. Inside the company, the message landed like a dropped tray. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Managers reread the lines, searching for what was not said. Flight crews checked schedules that suddenly showed gaps where assignments used to be. Evelyn watched it unfold from a distance. She had returned to Chicago by car the night before, refusing a company jet. Familiar highways, familiar fatigue. At home, she brewed coffee too strong and stood by the window as morning light crept across brick and glass. Her phone buzzed steadily. Operations, legal, human resources. She let it ring. Silence, she knew, could be as instructive as speech. By mid-morning, the first call she answered came from someone she trusted. Harold Finch, 72, former union negotiator, a man who understood both power and people. "They're scared," he said without preamble. "Not just the ones directly involved. Everyone." "They should be," Evelyn replied. "Fear isn't the enemy. Avoidance is." Harold sighed. "The Pilots Association is asking questions. They want assurances this doesn't turn into a witch hunt." "It won't," Evelyn said. "But it will turn into a mirror." A pause, then a low chuckle. "You always did have a way with words." "I have a way with consequences." That afternoon, Evelyn walked into headquarters through a side entrance she'd used for years. No entourage, no announcement. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet. People looked up, startled, then looked away, unsure whether acknowledgement was required. She nodded to a receptionist who blinked, then smiled too late. In the executive conference room, the leadership team waited. Coffee cups, tablets, stiff backs. Evelyn took her seat and did not open with remarks. She opened with a question. "When was the last time any of you flew coach?" she asked. A few exchanged glances. One man cleared his throat. "I usually fly." "I didn't ask how you usually fly," Evelyn said, calm, controlled. "I asked when." Silence. "That's what I thought," she said. "We have built layers between ourselves and the reality of our product. Layers of comfort, layers of justification." The head of communications shifted. "We're preparing a statement. If this becomes public—" "It will," Evelyn said. "And when it does, we will not hide behind phrasing." She stood and walked to the window. Planes lined the horizon, metal birds waiting their turn. "This company was built on trust," she continued. "Not performance metrics, not brand sentiment. Trust. You erode that, you don't get it back with apologies." One executive bristled. With respect, we have shareholders. Evelyn turned. Her gaze was steady, unflinching. With respect, she said, we have passengers who entrust us with their lives. The room went still. That evening, the story leaked anyway. Not to national news, to a regional paper with an aging readership and a stubborn editor. The headline was modest. Questions raised after mid-flight incident. No drama. But the comments section filled quickly. Stories poured out. Missed call buttons, sharp tones, moments when people felt small at 30,000 feet. Evelyn read every one. Jason read them too. From his apartment, uniform folded on a chair like a skin he wasn't sure he could put back on. Messages from co-workers stacked up, some supportive, some cold. One simply read, "You didn't have to say anything." He stared at the screen, jaw tight. He thought of the man coughing, of Evelyn's steady hands. He typed back, slowly. Someone did. Across town, the purser sat alone in her kitchen, lights off, the glow from her phone harsh against tired eyes. Her name wasn't public, but she knew it was only a matter of time. She replayed the flight again and again, each moment twisting into something sharper. She had kept order. That was her job, wasn't it? Order mattered. Chaos killed people. Her phone buzzed. A message from the captain. "We need to talk." She didn't answer. The next morning, Evelyn convened a meeting that surprised everyone. Not executives, not lawyers. Flight attendants, gate agents, mechanics. People whose hands touched the work every day. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Evelyn stood at the front, no podium, no slides. "I'm not here to lecture," she said. "I'm here to listen." At first, no one spoke. Then a woman in her late 50s raised a hand. Her voice shook as she talked about being told to smile while a passenger shouted inches from her face. A mechanic spoke about pressure to clear planes fast, corners cut quietly. A gate agent described being trained to de-escalate without authority. Jason listened, heart pounding. When he spoke, it surprised him. He didn't plan the words. They came anyway. "I was afraid," he said. "Not of the passengers, of the system." Heads nodded. Evelyn took notes, actual notes, pen scratching paper. When the room emptied, she remained seated, staring at the filled pages. This was heavier than a single flight. This was inheritance. Culture passed down like bad habits. That night she drafted a proposal. Not a press release. A blueprint. Mandatory rotation for leadership. Anonymous reporting with teeth. Training built around judgment, not scripts. And something else. Something radical. The next board meeting was tense. Voices rose. Concerns flew. Costs, risk, precedent. Evelyn waited. When she spoke, the room leaned in. "We will create an internal program," she said. "Executives, managers, anyone with decision authority. They will fly anonymously, regularly. Coach, middle seats, red eyes. They will live the experience." Laughter, nervous and disbelieving. "You're serious?" Martin said. "I've never been more serious," Evelyn replied. "Empathy cannot be outsourced." The vote took hours. It passed by a narrow margin. Outside, autumn deepened. Leaves fell. Flights continued. Inside the company, something shifted. Slowly, unevenly, but unmistakably. Jason received a call. He was asked to participate in a training advisory group. He hung up and sat for a long time, staring at the wall. Fear still lived in him, but something else had joined it. Resolve. The purser finally answered the captain's call. They spoke for an hour. No shouting, No defense, just quiet reckoning. When they hung up, she cried for the first time since the incident, shoulders shaking, grief and shame tangled together. Evelyn stood again at her window that night, city lights blinking awake. Change, she knew, was never clean. It demanded discomfort. It demanded time. But it also demanded someone willing to stand still while others caught up. She turned off the light and let the dark settle. Above the city, a plane crossed the sky, steady and sure. She watched until it vanished, already thinking about what would come next. The backlash arrived before the reforms did. It always did. Opinion pieces surfaced questioning leadership priorities. Anonymous sources complained about morale. A former executive went on cable news, speaking in careful half-sentences about overcorrection and optics. Evelyn watched the interview without sound, reading lips she already knew too well. The language of retreat. The language of people who had never been afraid on a plane. Inside the company, the mood shifted from shock to resistance. Schedules were rewritten. Training sessions were postponed due to operational needs. Emails softened language that had been sharp only days earlier. Momentum leaked out through 1,000 small delays. Evelyn noticed every one. She spent her days moving quietly through departments, unannounced. A gate at dawn, a maintenance hangar after midnight. She asked questions no one expected from someone at her level. How long does it take you to report a concern? Who decides if it matters? What happens if you're wrong? The answers varied. The fear did not. One afternoon, she boarded a commuter flight from Cleveland to Chicago under a different name. Middle seat, last row. The plane smelled of coffee and damp coats. A man beside her complained about legroom. A woman across the aisle clutched her purse like a shield. The attendant smiled automatically, eyes glazed. Evelyn watched the choreography. Efficient. Empty. Mid-flight, turbulence hit. Sudden, sharp. Overhead bins rattled. A glass shattered somewhere up front. The cabin tensed, a single organism bracing for impact. The attendant froze for a heartbeat too long before moving, hands trembling as she steadied a passenger. Evelyn felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear. Recognition. After landing, she waited until the aisle cleared, then spoke to the attendant. Not with accusation, with curiosity. "You handled that well," she said. "What training did you receive for moments like that?" The woman blinked, surprised. "Mostly scripts," she said. What to say, not how to be. That night, Evelyn rewrote the blueprint. Meanwhile, Jason's life narrowed and expanded at the same time. He was no longer flying. Officially, he was on paid administrative leave while the review continued. Unofficially, he was being watched. Some co-workers stopped texting. Others confided late at night, voices low, stories spilling out like secrets they'd been waiting to tell. One evening, he met an older flight attendant at a diner near the airport. Carol, 64, 30 years in the air. She stirred her coffee slowly, eyes distant. "I saw this coming," she said. "We all did." "Then why didn't anyone stop it?" Jason asked. Carol smiled sadly. "Because stopping it costs you something. And most people don't realize what they're willing to lose until they're asked." Jason drove home with that sentence echoing in his head. Across town, the purser sat through her union meeting, face composed, hands folded. The room buzzed with anger. She listened as others framed the situation as betrayal, management throwing crews under the bus, passengers overreacting. She said nothing. When it was her turn to speak, she stood slowly. "I followed procedure," she said, "but I forgot why the procedure exists." The room quieted. A few scoffed. Most avoided her gaze. She sat down, heart pounding, unsure whether she had just ended her career or saved something else. The captain, too, felt the weight. He reviewed old logs, old decisions, moments when he'd chosen not to leave the cockpit, not to ask questions. He had told himself it was discipline. He saw now it was distance. Evelyn called him one morning. No lawyers, no intermediaries, just a call. "I don't want a statement," she said. "I want your honesty." There was a long pause, then a breath. "I thought keeping my head down kept people safe," he said. "I was wrong." "Yes," Evelyn said. "And now?" "I want to fix it," he said, "if you'll let me." Evelyn closed her eyes. Trust was not automatic, but neither was change. "We'll talk," she said. The advisory group met for the first time on a rainy Thursday. Jason sat among mechanics, agents, attendants, pilots. Different uniforms. Same tension. Evelyn entered last, notebook in hand. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was to ask for specifics. Not ideals, not slogans. What failed you? Where did you hesitate? What would have helped? Answers came slowly, then faster. Fear of write-ups, fear of schedules changing, fear of being labeled difficult. Evelyn wrote it all down. "This isn't about being nice," she said finally. "It's about being responsible." The proposal evolved. Training now included silence, pauses, real scenarios without clear right answers. Leaders were required to sit in on debriefs without speaking. Feedback loops closed with action, not acknowledgement. The press caught wind of the changes. Some praised them, others mocked them. One columnist called it corporate therapy. Evelyn clipped the article and pinned it to her board. Progress provoked pushback. A senior manager resigned, citing philosophical differences. Stock dipped briefly. The board wavered. Martin called her late one night. "Are you sure?" he asked. Evelyn stood in her darkened living room, city humming beyond the glass. "I've never been more sure," she said. The first executive rotation flight launched quietly. No cameras, no announcements. A vice president sat in a middle seat on a red-eye, knees pressed, sleep impossible. He watched an attendant soothe a nervous passenger with nothing but patience and presence. He wrote Evelyn the next day. It was longer than any email she'd ever received from him. Jason was cleared to return to flying, with conditions: training, mentorship, accountability. He accepted without hesitation. On his first flight back, he felt the old fear rise as turbulence shook the cabin. He breathed through it. He moved anyway. The purser received notice of disciplinary action, not termination, mandatory retraining, probation, a chance. She cried again, this time with something like relief. Evelyn watched the changes take root unevenly. Some days felt like failure, others like fragile hope. She reminded herself that systems did not transform overnight. They resisted. They tested resolve. One evening, she boarded another anonymous flight. This time, when turbulence hit, the attendant moved immediately. Not perfectly, but humanly. A hand on a shoulder, a steady voice. Evelyn smiled faintly. Outside the window, the sky darkened. Inside the cabin, something lighter took shape. Not comfort, not certainty, but care. And for the first time since the oxygen masks had dropped without warning, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that this story might bend towards something better. Not because it was forced to, but because enough people had finally decided to look. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered, heavy with intention. Thick paper, clean margins, language sharpened to cut rather than persuade. A coalition of former employees, backed by an aggressive firm that specialized in spectacle, alleged wrongful suspension, hostile reform, reputational harm. The word reform appeared again and again, framed as punishment disguised as virtue. Evelyn read it once, then again. She did not sigh. She did not curse. She set the pages down and stared at the city until the meaning settled into something usable. This was the price of changing a system that had learned to protect itself. By noon, the board was in emergency session. Faces on screens, voices clipped. Someone spoke about risk, someone else about optics. Martin leaned forward, fingers steepled. "This could get ugly," he said. "They're positioning you as the architect of a purge." "I didn't purge people," Evelyn said. "I interrupted a pattern." Linda from legal warned about discovery. Internal emails, training drafts, the advisory group's notes. "They'll look for anything that sounds like intent," she said. "They'll find it," Evelyn replied. "I intend to do the right thing." Silence followed. The kind that came when arguments ran out and courage had to speak next. "Authorize a full defense," Martin said finally. "But understand what that means." "I do," Evelyn said. "It means we stop pretending this is small." Outside the glass walls, clouds rolled in low and fast, smearing the skyline into gray. A storm was coming, not just weather. The press picked it up within hours. Headlines sharpened. Reform sparks revolt. Airline overhaul faces backlash. Commentators lined up, dividing the story into neat sides. Power versus labor, elites versus workers. Nuance vanished in the noise. Jason felt it on his next flight. Whispers in the galley. A joke that landed wrong. A look held a beat too long. He focused on his tasks, on the weight of the coffee pot, the rhythm of his steps. During turbulence, he moved without waiting. The muscle memory of fear was still there, but it no longer drove. After landing, a passenger stopped him. An older man, hands trembling slightly. "You did good up there," he said. "Reminded me what this job is supposed to be." Jason nodded, throat tight. Small moments mattered. He held on to that. The purser watched the coverage from her living room, blinds half closed. Her name wasn't mentioned, but she felt exposed anyway. Messages from colleagues split down the middle. Support. Silence. Resentment. She replayed the meeting in the quiet room, Evelyn's eyes steady, the words measured. Not cruel. Exacting. She drafted a letter she didn't send, then another. Then she deleted both and sat in the dark until evening crept in. Evelyn testified 2 weeks later, not in court, but in the court of public opinion, under oath in a regulatory hearing streamed online. She wore no jewelry, her voice carried without strain. Questions came fast, framed to corner her into extremes. "Did you personally target employees?" "No." "Did you create an environment of fear?" "I exposed one." "Do you believe your personal experience on a single flight justified sweeping changes?" "I believe patterns justify accountability." A senator leaned in. "Isn't it true that your reforms place undue emotional burden on staff?" Evelyn met his gaze. "So does ignoring suffering." The clip circulated widely. Some applauded, others bristled. Evelyn watched none of it. She spent the afternoon with the advisory group, reviewing feedback from the latest rotation flights. The notes were raw, angry, hopeful, honest. A mechanic wrote about being seen for the first time. A gate agent described freezing when yelled at, then choosing to respond anyway. An executive admitted he had learned more in one red-eye than in 10 years of meetings. The lawsuit advanced, depositions scheduled, emails combed. One draft surfaced, an early version of the blueprint, language sharper than it should have been. The firm seized it, framing it as proof of intent to dismantle. The board panicked. Martin called late. "They want you to step back," he said, temporarily. Evelyn stood by her window, city lights blurred by rain. From what? She asked. From the public face of this. They want a sacrifice, she said, to calm the waters. Yes. And after? She asked. A pause. After, we see. Evelyn closed her eyes. She thought of the coughing man, of Jason's shaking hands, of the fear that had passed for order. No, she said. I won't disappear to make this easier. You could lose the board, Martin warned. Then they lose the point, she replied. The next day, a former captain testified against the reforms, voice quivering with practiced indignation. He spoke of dignity, of experience, of being sidelined. He did not mention the times he had stayed in the cockpit while the cabin burned with tension. The purser watched the testimony and made a decision. She requested to speak, not through counsel, directly. Her statement was brief. She described the flight, her choices, her fear of losing control. I believed authority protected safety, she said. I was wrong. Authority without humanity protects nothing. The room shifted. Cameras zoomed. Her union representative stiffened. Online, reactions exploded. Betrayal. Courage. Both words thrown like stones. Evelyn listened from her office, hands still. The truth had weight. It always did. The lawsuit faltered. Not collapsed. Faltered. Cracks formed as testimonies contradicted one another, as patterns emerged too clearly to deny. Settlement talks began quietly. Jason was called to testify. He wore his uniform. His voice shook at first, then steadied. He spoke of waiting, of fear, of a moment when someone chose not to. He did not name Evelyn. He did not need to. Afterward, he sat alone on a bench outside the courthouse, sun warm on his face, heart pounding. He felt older and lighter. Weeks passed. The storm thinned. Not gone. Thinner. The board stood firm, bruised but intact. The reforms continued, refined, defended. Not everyone stayed. Some left loudly, others quietly. One evening, Evelyn boarded a flight, openly this time, her name on the manifest. A murmur passed through the cabin. She took her seat and waited. The attendant approached, eyes nervous, then resolute. "Welcome aboard," she said. "If you need anything, please let me know." Evelyn smiled, small and genuine. "Thank you," she said. "I will." As the plane climbed, the city fell away, lights scattering like stars. Evelyn closed her eyes and breathed. The cost had been real, the resistance fierce. But the system had moved. Not because it was forced, because enough people had chosen to stand when it mattered. The engines hummed, steady and sure. Above the clouds, the air smoothed out. For the first time since the masks had dropped, Evelyn felt the tension ease, just a little, and allowed herself to believe that endurance, paired with truth, could still change the direction of flight. The settlement was announced on a Friday afternoon, timed to slip between headlines and weekends. No victory lap, no apology tour. Just a statement dense with language about resolution and forward movement. Money changed hands quietly. Agreements were signed. No one admitted fault. Everyone claimed progress. Evelyn read the notice once, then deleted the email. The work had never been about winning. Inside the company, the aftershocks lingered. Some departments moved faster now, eager to demonstrate alignment. Others slowed, cautious, wounded. Trust did not return on command. It seeped back in, uneven and fragile, like warmth after a long winter. Jason felt it in small ways. A nod from a senior attendant who had once looked through him. A question asked instead of an order. On a flight to Denver, An older woman rang her call button 3 times in quick succession, breath shallow, eyes wide. Jason reached her before the 3rd chime finished sounding. He knelt to meet her eye level, spoke softly, waited until her hands stopped shaking. When he stood, another attendant watched him, thoughtful, as if filing something away for later. The purser returned to the line under probation, her uniform fitting differently now, heavier somehow. She moved more slowly. She listened longer. Once, during boarding, a man snapped at her over a bag. The old reflex flared. Authority rose in her chest like armor. She felt it, named it, let it pass. "Let me help you," she said instead. The man blinked, surprised, then thanked her. The exchange left her unsettled and oddly relieved. Evelyn stepped back from daily operations, but not from presence. She attended briefings unannounced, sat in the back, took notes. She no longer needed to assert authority. It followed her now, quieter, rooted in consistency. When she spoke, people listened not because they had to, but because she had proven she would listen first. One evening, she received a handwritten letter forwarded from customer relations. The paper was creased, the handwriting careful. It was from the wife of the man who had been coughing on the flight months earlier. She wrote about fear, about relief, about gratitude not just for help, but for dignity. "You saw us," the letter said. That mattered. Evelyn placed the letter in the folder she kept for such things. Evidence of impact that would never appear in reports. The industry noticed. Other airlines announced new training initiatives, careful not to credit North Star directly. Consultants rebranded empathy. Panels debated balance. Change spread the way it always did, through imitation disguised as innovation. Not all of it stuck. A year passed. The oxygen mask incident faded into memory for most. For those who lived it, it remained close. Jason marked the anniversary quietly, flying a late route, watching clouds glow in moonlight. He felt steadier now, less like he was waiting for permission to exist. The purser requested a transfer to training. She stood before a classroom of new hires, hands clasped, voice steady. She told them about rules, about safety, and then, carefully, about fear. "If you feel it," she said, "don't let it decide for you." Some nodded, some looked skeptical. She kept going. Evelyn watched from the back, unseen. On a flight from Chicago to Seattle, turbulence rolled in slow waves. The cabin tensed. A child whimpered. An attendant paused, then moved, kneeling, speaking low. Another followed suit. Evelyn felt the shift, subtle but unmistakable. Not perfect, but present. As the plane leveled, she looked around at faces lit by overhead lights, ordinary and unguarded. She thought about systems, how they bent, how they broke, how they could be coaxed into something better if enough people believed they were allowed to act. When the wheels touched down, applause rippled, genuine and warm. Evelyn joined in, softly. In the jet bridge, a man approached her, hesitant. Grey hair, kind eyes. "My daughter works for your airline," he said. "She says it feels different now." Evelyn smiled. "I'm glad," she said. "Tell her thank you." That night, back home, she stood again by her window. The city stretched out below, restless and alive. She thought of the moment when the masks had dropped, when fear had flashed bright and raw. She thought of what followed, the choices, the cost. Change, she knew, was never a straight line. It looped, it resisted. It demanded patience as much as courage. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jason. "Just landed. Good flight." She typed back. "Proud of you." Evelyn turned off the light and let the darkness settle. Not heavy now, but quiet. Somewhere, another plane crossed the sky, carrying people who trusted strangers with their safety. The engines hummed, the cabin lights glowed. And for the first time in a long while, that trust felt a little less fragile, held up not by procedure alone, but by people willing to look, to move, to choose. The invitation arrived in an unmarked envelope, thick paper, no logo, the return address typed instead of printed. Evelyn recognized the tone before she opened it. Careful, deliberate, the kind of communication that came when institutions wanted proximity without obligation. A federal advisory panel on transportation safety and public trust was convening in Washington, and they wanted her in the room. Not as a keynote, as a witness. She folded the letter and set it beside her coffee. Outside, winter pressed against the glass, Chicago gray and unyielding. She had learned to read these moments. This was not recognition. It was testing, power examining whether it could absorb dissent without changing shape. She accepted. The hearing room was colder than it needed to be. Flags, seal on the wall. Faces trained into neutrality. Evelyn took her seat at the long table, microphone angled toward her mouth. She noted who avoided her eyes and who did not. Years of boardrooms had taught her that attention was rarely accidental. Questions came in layers. Policy, oversight, metrics. How do you quantify dignity? How do you balance empathy with efficiency? How do you prevent subjectivity from eroding command? Evelyn answered each without haste, her words measured, precise, stripped of ornament. You can measure response time, she said. You can measure error rates. You can measure retention. What you cannot measure is the moment someone chooses to act when the script runs out. That moment defines your culture, whether you acknowledge it or not. A senator leaned forward, fingers steepled. Are you suggesting we legislate compassion? I'm suggesting, Evelyn replied, that systems which punish compassion eventually fail safety. The room shifted. Pens paused. Someone coughed. Across the country, Jason watched the stream on his phone during a layover, earbuds in, uniform jacket draped over the chair beside him. He replayed the sentence twice, feeling it settle somewhere deep. A year ago, he would have dismissed it as idealism. Now it felt like a diagnosis. The panel adjourned without applause, no conclusions drawn. But the questions followed Evelyn out of the room, trailing her down marble hallways and into waiting cars. By evening, excerpts were circulating. Headlines cautious. Analysts divided. The phrase, punish compassion, began appearing in think pieces, some skeptical, some thoughtful. Evelyn returned home, exhausted in a way that sleep did not fix. She dreamed of alarms again. This time, they did not stop when she woke. The next morning, she received a call from Martin. His voice carried strain. There's pressure, he said, from regulators, from investors. They want assurances this doesn't open floodgates. Evelyn closed her eyes. It already has, she said. People are talking. That's not a flood. That's circulation. They want limits, Martin said. Then they misunderstand the problem, she replied. The board meeting that followed was tense. Charts projected, risk models updated, language softened, hardened, softened again. Evelyn listened until the end, then spoke once. We can retreat, she said, or we can lead, but we cannot do both. Silence followed. This time, no one filled it. Jason faced his own reckoning on a flight to Boise. A passenger grew agitated during boarding, voice rising, hands sharp with frustration. The gate agent froze, eyes darting. Jason felt the familiar surge, the old instinct to wait, to defer. He felt it, and moved anyway. Sir, he said calmly, stepping between the man and the agent, not blocking, just present. Let's slow this down. The man scoffed. You don't get it. Jason nodded. I might not, but I can help. The words surprised him with their steadiness. The man hesitated, then deflated, anger bleeding out like air from a punctured tire. Later, the gate agent mouthed, "Thank you." Jason felt something loosen in his chest. Not every moment ended that way. The purser encountered resistance in training sessions, skepticism sharpened by resentment. "This is all just cover," someone muttered. She kept teaching anyway. She spoke less about rules now, more about choices. She told them about the night she sat alone in her kitchen, lights off, realizing she had confused control with care. Some listened, some did not. She learned to measure progress in inches. Evelyn received another letter, this one from a regional airport authority. They were piloting a joint initiative, inspired by North Star's changes, they said. Would she consult? Evelyn smiled faintly. Influence traveled faster sideways than up. Spring crept in. Snow retreated. The city breathed. Then the incident happened. A viral video, shot on a phone. A flight attendant on a different airline raising her voice at an elderly passenger. Dismissive. Sharp. The clip cut before context, as clips always did. The internet erupted. Comparisons drawn. North Star named, praised, criticized, blamed. Evelyn watched the video once. Then again. She felt the familiar tightening. Not anger, responsibility. This was the shadow side of change. When standards rose, failures elsewhere reflected back. A reporter called. "Do you think your reforms have gone too far?" she asked, "creating unrealistic expectations?" Evelyn paused. "I think," she said, "that expectations reveal what we believe people are capable of. I believe they're capable of more." The quote ran. Jason felt the ripple on his next flight. Passengers watched him more closely, some with hope, some with suspicion. He did not perform. He worked. The board reconvened. Martin spoke first. "We're at a crossroads," he said. "We can codify what we've been doing, or we can slow it down." Evelyn looked around the table. Familiar faces, new lines, some fear, some resolve. "Codify," she said, "or it becomes anecdote." The vote was decisive this time. North Star published a framework, not a manifesto, a standard. Clear language, clear accountability, clear consequences. It was dry, it was firm, it was human. The reaction was immediate and mixed. Praise, pushback, copycats, critics. Evelyn read none of it. Instead, she visited a small regional hub where the reforms had barely reached. She stood at the gate as boarding began, unnoticed. She watched an attendant kneel to a child's level, explain turbulence in simple words. She watched a mechanic take an extra minute to answer a question instead of brushing past. Not perfect, but present. That night, Evelyn sat on a hotel bed, shoes off, looking at the city lights beyond unfamiliar glass. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jason again. "Rough flight. We handled it." She typed back, "Good work. Get some rest." She lay back and stared at the ceiling. The work was expanding now, moving beyond her, beyond the company. That was the risk, and the goal. Somewhere above her, a plane cut through thinning clouds, steady and unseen. The engines held. The cabin hummed. People breathed easier without knowing why. Evelyn closed her eyes, not in relief, but in resolve. The story was no longer hers alone. And that, she knew, was exactly how it had to be. The night the rulebook changed, no one celebrated. There was no champagne, no speeches, no carefully framed photos. Just a document released into the system like a new current in deep water. Clear language, hard edges. Accountability written without euphemism. It did not promise kindness. It demanded responsibility. Evelyn watched the release from her office, lights low, city muted beyond the glass. She knew what would follow. Confusion, anger, relief, all at once. Change never arrived neatly. By morning, the emails began. Questions masked as concerns, concerns sharpened into challenges. A regional director asked whether this undermined command authority. A senior pilot questioned whether discretion was being replaced by emotional judgment. Evelyn answered none of them directly. She forwarded the questions to the new oversight group and let the process speak. Systems learned only when they were forced to operate without a single voice guiding them. Jason felt the difference immediately. On a flight out of Sacramento, a delay stacked on top of another delay, tempers fraying in the aisle. In the past, the playbook would have been avoidance until escalation forced intervention. This time, the purser gathered the crew before boarding finished. A quick huddle. No script. Just roles. Who watched the families? Who handled the anxious? Who took the brunt of complaints? Jason volunteered without thinking. The words came easily now. Presence had become muscle memory. A man in row 19 raised his voice. Jason met it halfway, not matching volume, just pace. The argument dissolved before it could form. Later, the purser caught Jason's eye and nodded once. It felt heavier than praise. Not every crew adapted so smoothly. At a different hub, resistance hardened. A supervisor quietly told her team to stick to the old ways until this blows over. A complaint followed. Then another. Oversight flagged the pattern. Intervention came swiftly. Retraining mandated. Authority redefined. The supervisor resigned 2 weeks later, citing cultural misalignment. The phrase echoed through the industry. The purser, who had once enforced order like armor, now found herself mediating between generations. Younger attendants leaned into the changes instinctively. Older ones bristled, feeling accused by implication. She spoke carefully, choosing stories over directives. She told them about the moment she realized fear had been her compass, about the cost of that realization. Some softened. Some did not. She learned to let time do what argument could not. Evelyn traveled more now, not for inspection, but for calibration. She sat in briefing rooms and back rows. She listened. She resisted the urge to correct immediately. Leadership, she had learned, was less about steering and more about removing obstacles so others could move. At a Midwestern airport, a mechanic approached her quietly. "I didn't think this was for people like us," he said. "Turns out it is." She thanked him and wrote it down later, alone. The notebook had grown thick with moments like that, proof that the abstract could still touch the ground. The backlash had not vanished. It had reorganized. A think tank published a paper arguing that North Star's model risked operational inconsistency. A former regulator questioned scalability. Evelyn read both, underlined passages, wrote notes in the margins. Critique sharpened thinking. Dismissal dulled it. Then came the accident. Not North Star, a different airline. A hard landing in heavy weather. No fatalities. Injuries, yes. Investigations began. Early reports pointed to delayed decision-making, hesitation in the cabin, unclear authority lines. The familiar phrases surfaced. Procedure followed. Judgment deferred. The media drew lines. Comparisons inevitable. Evelyn said nothing publicly. She waited. Jason watched the coverage in a hotel room, the glow of the television harsh against the dark. He imagined the moment when someone had waited too long. He felt the old fear stir, then settle. He knew what he would do now. That knowledge steadied him. The board met again. This time, no panic, no raised voices. Data on the table, trends, external validation. Martin looked older, more tired. But something in his posture had changed. "They're asking if we'll consult," he said. "On standards." Evelyn nodded once. "We will," she said. "With conditions." "What conditions?" someone asked. "That it isn't about branding," she replied. "It's about practice." The vote was swift. Partnerships formed quietly. Working groups convened. Language harmonized. Not everything aligned. It didn't need to. What mattered was that the conversation had shifted from whether compassion belonged in safety to how it could be operationalized without dilution. Jason was invited to speak at a training symposium. He almost declined. Public speaking had never been his strength. The purser encouraged him. "Tell the truth," she said. "That's enough." He stood at the podium, hands damp, heart racing. He spoke about waiting, about the moments someone didn't, about how systems trained him to doubt his instincts, and how unlearning that had saved him. The room was quiet when he finished. Then applause, measured and sustained. Jason stepped down, legs shaking, something unclenched inside him. Evelyn listened from the back, unseen. She felt no pride in the personal sense, only confirmation. This was what it looked like when change left its origin. Later that evening, she walked alone along the river, coat pulled tight, wind cutting. The city reflected itself in broken lines on the water. She thought about the oxygen masks, the snap of plastic, the way panic had spread. She thought about how close fear always was, waiting for permission. Her phone buzzed. A message from Martin. Regulators approved the joint framework, quietly. She replied with a single word. Good. At home, she found the old folder again. Letters, notes, artifacts of a journey she had not planned but had accepted. She added one more page. A program evaluation. Outcomes measured, not just in response times, but in retention, in reduced complaints, in fewer injuries during turbulence events. Numbers mattered. They always had. Now they told a fuller story. The purser closed out her probation with a final assessment. Not glowing. Honest. She kept it folded in her bag for days before filing it away. It wasn't redemption. It was direction. On a flight from Seattle to Anchorage, Jason faced severe turbulence over open water. The cabin jolted hard. Screams rose. He moved fast, voice cutting through noise, hands steady. The crew worked like a unit, unscripted, but aligned. When it ended, the cabin exhaled together. Later, the captain thanked them over the intercom. No theatrics, just acknowledgement. Evelyn learned about that flight weeks later through a report. She smiled faintly and turned the page. The story had grown larger than any single incident. Larger than her. That was the measure. Change that did not need its architect present to persist. As winter returned, quiet and insistent, Evelyn boarded a flight as a passenger once more. She chose a window seat, middle of the cabin. No recognition, no announcement. Just another traveler. When turbulence came, mild but sudden, the attendant moved immediately. Not perfectly, but with care. Evelyn watched the aisle, the hands, the eyes. She felt the plane steady. Outside, clouds parted. Light spilled in. Evelyn rested her head back and closed her eyes, not in relief, but in acceptance. The work would never be finished. Systems always drifted. But now there was a current pushing the other way. And for the first time since that afternoon when the masks had fallen, she felt certain that when fear rose again, someone would move without waiting to be told. The morning Evelyn stepped onto the aircraft, the cabin felt different before anyone spoke. Not quieter, not calmer. Different in the way a room feels after an argument has finally ended, and everyone knows what will not be said again. The aisle smelled faintly of coffee and recycled air, the familiar scent of transit and patience. She took her seat without ceremony, window side, mid-cabin, The place where you saw everything without being seen. The engines spooled up with their low, steady growl, a sound that carried history in it. Thousands of flights, millions of lives. She rested her hands on the armrests and let the vibrations settle into her bones. Across the aisle, a man folded a newspaper with care, the crease precise, the habit of someone who believed order still mattered. 2 rows up, a woman whispered to her husband, counting medications under her breath. Ordinary lives, entrusted again. When the plane climbed, turbulence followed sooner than forecast. Not violent, enough to unsettle. The overhead bins rattled, a chorus of hollow knocks. A child whimpered. A glass chimed softly in its holder. The seatbelt sign flashed on, its familiar ping cutting through the cabin like a held breath. The crew moved. Not all at once, not perfectly, but decisively. One attendant knelt beside the child, voice low and even, hands open. Another steadied an older passenger whose shoulders had gone rigid. Jason appeared near the aisle, posture grounded, eyes scanning, already anticipating where fear would land next. No one waited for permission. No one looked toward the cockpit for validation. They acted because it was time to act. Evelyn watched without expression, her chest tightening not with anxiety, but with recognition. This was the quiet proof. Not a headline, not a framework. A moment when training dissolved into instinct, and instinct chose care. The turbulence passed. The cabin exhaled. A few scattered laughs rose, nervous but real. The seatbelt sign clicked off. Normalcy returned, but something remained underneath it, like a deeper rhythm finding its pace. Later, as drinks were served, the purser paused by Evelyn's row. A woman in her 40s, composed, eyes alert without being hard. "Let me know if you need anything," she said, not as a script, but as an offer. Evelyn nodded, the exchange small and complete. She thought of the years behind this moment, the resistance, the hearings, the long nights of doubt when progress felt theoretical and backlash felt personal. She thought of the lawsuit, the settlement, the weight of choosing not to disappear when it would have been easier. She thought of the purser, who had learned to lay down armor, of the captain who had stepped out of the cockpit at last, of Jason finding his footing not by waiting, but by moving. None of it had been clean. None of it had been quick. That was the truth people often forgot when they spoke about change. It bruised. It demanded endurance. It asked for patience, when patience felt like surrender, and resolve, when resolve felt lonely. Outside the window, clouds thinned. Sunlight spilled across the wing, bright and unguarded. Evelyn felt the tension ease from her shoulders, not because the work was done, but because it no longer depended on her alone. The system had learned something new. Not perfectly, but enough. When the plane began its descent, the city came into view, a patchwork of streets and stories, all of them moving forward, whether they were ready or not. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and unadorned, thanking the crew by name. It wasn't policy. It wasn't required. It was acknowledgement. As the wheels touched down, there was no applause this time, just a shared sense of arrival. People reached for bags, phones lit up. Life resumed. Evelyn remained seated for a moment, letting the movement flow around her. She felt older than when this had begun, and lighter in ways she had not expected. In the jet bridge, Jason caught her eye. He didn't stop her. He didn't speak. He simply nodded, a gesture of respect without obligation. She returned it and walked on, blending into the stream of travelers, another face in a moving crowd. Outside the terminal, the air was crisp, the kind of air that sharpened the edges of things and made them feel real. Evelyn paused, adjusted the strap of her bag, and looked back once at the building behind her. So much noise inside. So many stories intersecting for moments at a time, then moving on. This had never been about power revealing itself in a dramatic instant. It had been about responsibility, choosing to stay visible when it would have been easier to hide. About refusing to let fear masquerade as order. About remembering that dignity was not a luxury layered onto safety, but the foundation of it. She stepped forward, the ground solid beneath her feet, the future unwritten, but no longer uncertain. If this story moved you, take a second to like and subscribe, and share your thoughts below with 3 simple words.